Good afternoon again, and welcome to the latest edition of the LSU Sports Insider Podcast. It is Thursday, May the 8th. I'm Zach Ewing, along with Wilson Alexander, the LSU football beat writer for The Advocate. And as promised, we're back for part two of a transfer portal discussion. This one a little more big picture, Wilson, I guess is the best way to put it. You did a lot of work on a story kind of diving into how LSU stepped up its game in the transfer portal. You can read that, of course, at theadvocate.com/LSU. And we are not going to cover all of it. And so I encourage everybody to go read it as an addition to this. We might talk about a few more things, but I don't know, Wilson, I think that's probably the general gist of what this is exactly how LSU pulled this off.
They pulled this off for a few reasons. A big one is having more money. I mean, that's what you kind of have to be able to do in the NIL era. And then we're in this moment in college football and college sports in general, but in college football here, between NIL money and the collective sort of funding rosters and the start of the revenue sharing era, which is expected to begin this summer. And so there's a lot of money out there that's available, and LSU understood that it was behind with its collective and financially and how much NIL money it was giving out to players over the past 3 years. And they really were able to improve their fundraising and also have some, go a little bit. I think we'll probably get into this more, but change the way they were kind of making some decisions too. Became much more formulaic. There's a system that Austin Thomas, the GM, has implemented that has been helpful in that regard. And now you're looking at a roster that they believe is much better than it was at any point previously in the Brian Kelly era from top to bottom, which I think is important to note because obviously in 2023, LSU had the best offense in the country and a Heisman Trophy winning quarterback, but the defense was terrible. There feels like there's maybe more balance from offense to defense to special teams now than there ever has been, and maybe more depth across the board as well.
Yeah, we talked about that a lot on Monday's show, which I'll put a link to in the description. You can go back and watch, or you could subscribe to the LSU Tigers at NOLA.com YouTube channel. The LSU Insider Podcast is listed there. You can get all of our shows all across all sports. But that's right. They're obviously more talented. They're obviously better than they were. And it was a concerted effort to do that. I think we'll start there because there's sort of these key sea change moments, I think. And it may have started, I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong, Wilson. It feels to me like it started even going back a full year into the offseason of the 2024-25 season, where LSU kind of was content to just tweak the roster a little bit, add here, add there. And then they look up and they see what some of these other schools did in the transfer portal, namely Ole Miss, their rival to the east, or really to the north, and kind of thought, wait a minute, maybe we should be doing that.
Well, a year ago, LSU had the 43rd ranked transfer class in the country. And let's note that the Advocate policy, we use 24/7 sports rankings. So any numbers that we throw out, that's from them, because On3s are a little bit different. On3 has Texas Tech, for example, right now as the number one portal class in the country, that LSU uses number 2. But so going back a year, yes, LSU had the 43rd ranked class. They only brought in 9 transfers. And Brian Kelly said to me that they thought that it would have been premature to really go heavily into the portal last year. And the reason for that being that he felt the foundation of the program elsewhere needed to be improved, that the young players needed to get playing time, guys like Dominic McKinley and Ahmad Bro, so they would be ready. And that now, a year later, LSU now has a strong core, and it can build on top of that with the transfer class. Now, it's easy to see where maybe a coach is sort of just saying things that sound good to justify their decision-making. I mean, LSU last year in the spring portal window needed defensive tackles, went after top defensive tackles, and did not get them. And a big reason why was that they were outbid for them. They also did not want to offer the kind of money that those defensive tackles were asking for. They were asking for 7 figures, and LSU wasn't content to offer that kind of money. They had some money available. Their budget last year for the for the whole team was $8 million, I was told, from the collective, and they only spent 5.5. So there was money available that they didn't spend. Philosophically, they did not want to go over what they thought was fair market value. But they also needed to raise more money to actually be able to go after the portal when it became time. But they, according to Brian Kelly, didn't see that as the time to maybe go and invest, to let the foundation continue to be put in place. Another reason for that, frankly, is that LSU's 2020 3 recruiting class, or maybe it's 2023 recruiting class, the group that would be juniors now going into this season. A lot of them have not panned out, and a lot of them are not with the program anymore. So it's kind of makes sense that LSU would now, in this portal cycle, go after a lot of guys with experience who have played snaps and come right in near the top of your depth chart and be able to kind of supplement where you don't have that already on the roster. And so I think that that's what LSU probably accomplished. But some of that was because guys didn't pan out in that 23 class. They also just didn't feel like the roster was where it needed to be to go into the portal the way that they did this year, a year ago. But to your point, I mean, they started planning for the portal, Austin Thomas, the GM, said, in August. And he was doing assessments of the roster throughout the spring and the summer so that they would then be ready to make a push like this.
Yeah, so it's a little bit, I think, short-sighted to say, oh, LSU didn't have the 2024 season that they wanted, and so they just poured all this money into the portal. And it's not to say that didn't motivate them, but like the process had to start before then.
Yes, absolutely. Austin Thomas was adamant a few times when asked about different things that happened over the course of the fall, one of them being the Bryce Underwood situation, if those were sort of, inflection points, if those were really turning points for this, what they did in the transfer portal. And he said no, the planning, again, started in August. And really, even before that, to go back to what I said a second ago, where how he was doing assessments on the roster going, dating back to last spring, to, as he said, understand in order to go, what was it exactly that he said? Basically, in order to understand what you need, you have to know what you have already. And so he was, as he came in from Ole Miss back to LSU for the third time last January, he got a good idea of all that. And then in August, they started setting up their national board and rating every single college football player in the country, according to him, in August, so that they would be able to know kind of what everybody's valuations were, what they think that they would be worth, and just sort of have that all of those scouting done for when somebody hit the portal in December. So yes, this started well beforehand. Fundraising started well beforehand, but it was all building toward this December portal window when LSU went and eventually added 16 players.
Yeah, that's a good way to kind of transition into the role of Austin Thomas. He's a guy, I don't know how many casual LSU fans even know who he is or that LSU has a general manager, but this is something we've seen popping up around college football. He was actually with LSU as far back as the 2019 national championship season. And then
earlier than that, even.
Has it been earlier? Yeah, even longer than
that. Yeah, this is his third stint at LSU. He was named general manager in 2016, and it was believed that he was the first person in college football to hold that title. So he's had a lot of experience in this space, a lot of time spent in that role. He doesn't actually even technically have the general manager title. Like, that's not like his full official role on staff as it is listed on LSU's sports website. But that is what he does in essence, is he's the general manager of this team to be able to put the roster together and keep track of the spending and all those things, which Scott Woodward sort of understood. LSU's athletic director understood that revenue sharing was coming. That they needed somebody who really could do that, who understood how to go after the portal, which is something that he had helped Lane Kiffin with at Ole Miss. Ole Miss has signed at least 20 transfers in 4 straight years. And so Austin had helped him do that in back-to-back seasons. When Austin was there, they signed top 2 portal classes. And so now, LSU brings Austin back for the third time, makes him the GM, gives him a key role in the administration in athletics. And he has been a huge figure in all of this in helping sort of form this roster moving forward. He's been a voice that has been respected by donors as they've gone and fundraised, because he's able to present them with a plan. And that's a key part of it. The donors said that they really kind of understood, who I spoke to anyhow, that they understood sort of what else he wanted to do with this money, that it wasn't just throwing money at people, but it really had an idea of how to structure the spending on a roster. And a lot of that comes from Austin.
Yeah. I was thinking of the second stint at LSU, started in 2019, but as you said, he came back a couple of different times. And I don't know, you think about how he was at Ole Miss, and they're sort of the poster child for what could be done in this era of college football through transfers. And now he's at LSU trying to do the same thing. Now, you talked about how they were planning long before these events, a 3-game losing streak, losing Bryce Underwood, things like that, which we're going to dig into a little bit more. Those things, like it's fine to plan, and it's good that they were planning all the way back. You still need the money to make it happen in this day and age. And that's really been the key piece is like you're already asking a fan base and a donor base that you're for millions of dollars a year for facilities and anything else going back years. And now you're going back to them and saying, hey, if we want to compete, we're going to need more.
Donors will talk a lot these days about fatigue with being asked to give to something that some of them don't like. Pepper Rutland, a major LSU donor who I spoke to, who gave 7 figures to this NIL fundraising effort, doesn't like what it has become, where it's really pay for play and how there's sort of a erosion of loyalty and the things that people used to come to colleges for, maybe they don't value as much. But Pepper recognized that if you don't give to this and you fall behind, the way back from irrelevancy can take a while. He was an LSU linebacker and captain. He has seen LSU losing eras, and he doesn't want to return to that. And I think a lot of donors kind of felt similarly to that. And I was explaining to them sort of the importance of NIL. Some people hadn't really bought into that, the sheer amount of money that it has taken to build college football rosters in this day and age, and didn't really buy into the numbers that they were hearing coming from other teams. And then one of the things that Austin and Brian Kelly and Scott Woodward were part of really in late November, early December in particular, that's when it kind of intensified, was these meetings with donors to explain to them, this is why we need this money. We need your help. This is how we're going to use it. And this is our plan. And that resonated with them. And now LSU when Austin got here, they set a fundraising goal of $13 million. And they have hit and exceeded that, I'm told. They had a goal they wanted to be able to front load, which means basically giving out a lot of money between January of this year and the end of June of this year in NIL deals, because those NIL deals aren't going to be subject to the clearinghouse, the enforcement that is coming as a result of this new structure in college football, the House settlement, which obviously still has to be approved, but everything over $600 would have to go through that. So they're pushing out over $10 million, at least $10 million, now over the past few months and into June. And so I think I've gone way off track of what we were talking about, but basically the donors stepped up and really in a big way that we hadn't seen around LSU previously, because like I said, last year, the collective, which is funded by the donors, gave $5.5 million. This year, LSU might be as much as tripling at least what it spent on the team last year when you combine the NIL and what's coming with revenue sharing. And so it's a big change in terms of the money available for this team. And I should also mention that a lot of this has also coincided with fundraising for Bayou Traditions, the collective, coming underneath the umbrella of the Tiger Athletic Foundation, LSU's third-party fundraising arm, TAF, that everybody is, I think, aware of. That happened last summer, and that's been a part of this as well that has been helpful, because that's now putting Bayou Traditions under something that's more recognizable to an LSU fan, and a lot of boost has come with that too.
Yeah. And I just want to circle back to Pepper Rutland, who played football for LSU as a linebacker in the 70s and now owns a construction firm right in Baton Rouge. And what you said about his, I don't know if it's reluctance, but he basically is giving money even though he doesn't necessarily agree with the system. And this is a quote from your story, Wilson, where he says, you just have to make the decision. Are you willing to help participate in a system that you don't agree with, that you think is flawed terribly, but keeps you in the mix of a winning program while all this gets sorted out? That was it. I just thought coming back would be way too hard. It may take years and years and years. And so we find ourselves in this wild west of the transfer portal era and of college football in general with NIL money. And, when the NCAA basically allowed this to happen, they didn't put any guidelines in place. And we've all said for years, the NCAA is toothless when it comes to this stuff. This has been the best example of any of it. There are no guidelines. So people just started paying whatever they felt like they should pay. And now it's just kind of become this attitude of keeping up with the Joneses. Like if Alabama and Ole Miss and Georgia and Texas A&M are going to pay out all this money, LSU better also, or they're going to fall behind. And like you said, to their credit, I think the donors realized that at some point and Brian Kelly and Austin Thomas got out there and shook the bushes and got as much money as they could. But then once they had that budget, which I believe they did meet the $13 million budget, correct?
Yes, they hit, and I was told they exceeded that too.
So then it becomes a matter of which players do we want to go after, what positions do we want to go after, and Austin Thomas and that spreadsheet you talked about played a very large role in that as well.
Yeah, this was something that Austin began to develop when he was at Ole Miss, actually in 2022. He's worked with a company called NextGen Prospect, which has put this system together. And they started out as, sort of basic spreadsheets, kind of being able to manipulate data and try to help make yourself more efficient. And it's evolved over the past few years. And Austin has been a big part of that, actually. Talking to one of the founders of NextGen Prospect, that he kind of came to them and said, hey, how can we make this a little bit more interactive and be able to track spending? And they responded to that. They've started implementing that. And Austin said there's still kind of a ways to go for it to become sort of what he has fully envisioned this software, this system being, but that it really has helped in terms of he's able to input one, change of value of a certain player or a spot on the team, and everything else then changes accordingly to fit still within the salary cap, the amount of money that LSU has to spend. And this sort of whole thing he refined with he and Scott Woodward took a visit on one of LSU's bye weeks last year to the Seattle Seahawks to talk to them about how they manage their money under the salary cap. He also had conversations with the Houston Texans and other people in the NFL about how do you work under a salary cap, because that's what college football is going to have in the house settlement. Teams are going to be able to spend, schools in general are going to be able to spend up to $20.5 million in the first year, and LSU is expecting to spend 13.5 of that on football. One thing to note real quick, that money is going to be used between both the 2025 and the 2026 teams. But you've got all these numbers floating around there. You've got everything you spend on NIL too, and this system has helped really make things efficient when somebody has entered the transfer portal, because they already know kind of how they value every single spot on the roster. If someone wants to leave and they're asking for a lot more than LSU thinks that they are worth, then they'll let them walk, because they are able to make these sort of formulaic choices based on the amount of money that they have available and how they value every single spot. A quarterback is probably going to be more valuable to you, and you might devote more of your money to that. And the system sort of reflects that. LSU has percentages across for how many freshmen, how many returning players, and how many transfers they want on the team. And one of the things that Brian Kelly has said is that they even have percentages for certain valuations for every position and every spot within that. And so this system kind of helps keep track of all those things, helps make it quicker, and has been a real key to what they've been able to do. It's sort of Austin's secret weapon in a way, I guess.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it's important. Just listening to you talk about it, there is so much going on and so many variables and so many different directions they could go, that you can see where you would need something that just says, okay, formulaically, here's what we need, here's what we can spend on it, here's how much money we have, now dole it out. I mean, it's like spreadsheet work, right? Like that's really what it is. But
it's like a very fancy Excel spreadsheet
on a very big scale.
Yeah. And that's the other thing about this system is it can pull in what LSU's national boards are looking like. It has a lot of different stuff kind of working with it all together and sort of making those things cohesive, and be able to, again, just take the emotion out of some of your decision making. But one of the things that people I talked to noted was that it really gives them a starting point for every negotiation, basically, and that they're able to work off of that if they need to. If they think that somebody is really valuable to them and maybe exceeds what they have in that spot, they can do that. It's not like they're just going to stick to this one thing all the time, but it gives them a starting point that they feel really good about.
Yeah, no doubt. And I'm glad we're here to try to make sense of it all. This probably will not be our most popular podcast just because it is kind of confusing. It is kind of dense, but I think it's important to see where LSU got here. And again, encourage you to go read Wilson's story. We're going to take a quick 30-second break. I do want to get into kind of the Bryce Underwood effect on all of this, which may be a more tangible thing people can remember. And then also spin things forward and look at what this means for LSU next year and into the future, the NIL efforts, the house settlement, which could create a different way of paying players and all of that. So we'll be right back on the LSU Sports Insider after this.
There's no better place to parlay than Caesars Sportsbook. With quick picks, you can tap right into pre-built, ready-to-bet parlays right from the home screen. And if you miss tip-off, no worries. You can play same-game parlays live during the action. Plus, it's never been easier to find and bet on the biggest matchups of the day, so you can keep up with all the action. Caesars Sportsbook, proud partner of the NBA and the only sportsbook app with Caesars Rewards. Download it today.
All right, back on the LSU Sports Insider talking transfer portal. Monday's show was exactly what LSU has done with the portal, where it makes them better, position groups, all that sort of stuff. Today is how they got it done. Fascinating discussion with Wilson Alexander. I want to move on to something you said, Wilson, and that's the Bryce Underwood effect on all of this. It's going to be strange to follow Bryce Underwood's career and kind of look at his sort of indirect effect on LSU football over the years as he, plays at Michigan, maybe into the NFL and things like that. But when Bryce Underwood flipped from LSU to Michigan, this is late November, I think November 21st. Is that ring a bell?
That's right. Yep.
And it was sort of like this throwing your hands up in the air moment for LSU fans, where it's, they were in the middle of a disappointing second half of the season. It looked like LSU had kind of fallen behind the elite in the SEC and maybe around the country. And now you have this number one quarterback from California who you could at least hang your hat on. And now, I'm sorry, he's from Michigan. Getting confused with my quarterbacks, but you have from out of state, right? Where he could be a difference maker in the future and you could kind of hang your hat on him, and then you lose him. That's a bad thing in and of itself, but it does seem from reading your story, Wilson, like LSU kind of used that as a momentum builder for raising some of these NIL funds.
So the night that he, flipped to Michigan, Carlos Spate, who's the general counsel and helped create Bayou Traditions and run it for up until really last summer, said that his phone started blowing up with everybody who had basically given at least $100,000 to NIL the past few years, asking him, what is going on? How did this happen? Why did this happen? And so Carlos's point, at least from his point of view, is that moment, that night, invigorated the donor base in a level that he had not seen before. That people who maybe had been resistant previously started reaching out, asking how they could help, what they needed to do. They started receiving more donations. This was also when, this was kind of the point when LSU, then that 2-week stretch that I mentioned earlier in late November, early December, this was the start of that. When they started going, then they were then going to donors and asking for money, kind of increasing this fundraising push. Now, everybody else who I talked to, Scott Warburton and Austin Thomas in particular, and especially Austin, pushed back on the notion that this was something that changed anything within LSU athletics, within LSU football, in terms of how they were going to go after the transfer portal. Austin said that, again, as we talked about, planning had begun months earlier, but that he even acknowledged that this resonated with people outside the building and the people who were helping write the checks to make what would happen in the transfer portal happen. It freed up some money as well. I mean, LSU was going to make Bryce Underwood the highest paid player on the team last year. Like, that's how much he would have been making. It would have been made him the highest paid player on the 2024 team. That doesn't necessarily apply to 2025, but just to give you kind of a frame of reference there of how much they were preparing to commit to him. So it freed up some money, but not so much that it dictated what LSU was able to do in the transfer portal. I don't think. They still had, as we sort of talked about, a lot of other millions of dollars available. But yeah, again, it sparked something in the donor base that needed to really be sparked. Maybe it's fear. Maybe that feeling is agitation or something else like that. That sort of whatever it is that makes you decide, I need to give money so this doesn't happen and keep happening. We need to keep up. That got them going. Now, LSU had already raised a lot of money to this point in its fundraising push. Even Carlos Spate, Rex said he thinks they would have been fine ultimately. But in Carlos's words, this quote turned on a faucet that has been pretty amazing in his mind. That really got people going because they didn't want this to happen to LSU again, and they finally came in, maybe realized we have to give money to NIL in a way that maybe the donors hadn't yet before to help LSU continue to stay competitive.
Yeah, I remember doing a live show with you that night.
Yeah, that's right.
like the comments of people. I mean, it was despair might be too strong of a word, too dramatic of a word, but it was like, you could feel the frustration, and a lot of times frustration spurs action. And that's kind of what happened. And that doesn't mean, again, LSU had these plans. They had a good bit of the money before this. I mean, it's not like we're saying Bryce Underwood changed the course of LSU football. LSU was going to be okay. But the point is, it did present a situation that LSU was able to take advantage of and kind of use to further these efforts. And then that results in this number one rated transfer class that we've been talking about so much, and that I think makes LSU at least among the favorites to win the SEC next year. I mean, they're at least maybe not the favorite, but they're in that first group. And they will have staying power going forward. So that's kind of where I want to end, is like, okay, you make a big push. One thing in your story that people will learn is that LSU doesn't have like one mega donor that is lifting this up year after year after year. It's a lot of smaller donations. And because of that, I think it's a little more, I don't want to say unsustainable, but it's just a little more fragile. Okay. Like you have to go get that every single year. And so, as you said, they didn't use the whole budget this year. They're still going to have money next year. They're planning this very carefully. They know what they're doing. But in your opinion, Wilson, and then also we need to bring in the house settlement discussion into this as well.
Yeah, definitely.
Change everything. But go ahead and tell people what does or does not make this sustainable for LSU.
Well, what wouldn't make this sustainable is if what it takes to be competitive just keeps going up and up and up, and you have to continue to rely on your donor base to do that, like they have over the past 4 years. LSU, I mean, Louisiana in general, it's not a state like Texas that just has it's all this like oil money and things like that. And there's a reason we've seen Texas and Texas A&M sign some really highly rated classes, because they've been able to pay for them over the past few years and have the money to do that. And there's more that goes into it. We have to acknowledge that. But that's one of the things that LSU maybe has a disadvantage of, and that people in the donor base and around the collective have said over the past few years. They've expressed some worry that if this were to continue, that LSU would be at a disadvantage, but that they are looking to that house settlement kind of providing some structure that wasn't there before. As I already mentioned, this settlement's going to, if it is approved here soon, we're still waiting on that. There were some things that were filed this week that came back to the judge in relation to grandfathering and roster spots and stuff for cut athletes and the roster limits that are going to be coming in as a part of this, that, we'll see how she responds to it, Judge Claudia Wilkin, that are going to determine whether or not this actually goes into place. If it does, though, that again, there'll be the salary cap that then increases year over year over year. And LSU's got plenty of money to be able to pay up for the salary cap. Like, the athletic department's well off, but it's the fact that you can't just like take the money within your athletic department completely and give it to NIL. That's not how it works. It's not supposed to be pay for play. And so you have to continue to rely on those donors. If you don't have to continue to rely on those donors, then, and LSU can just spend like everybody else, then it should be, and the people there think that it'll be fine. And we're also talking about comparatively, right? I mean, we're talking about LSU compared to Ohio State, compared to Texas. Like, when you talk about college football as a whole, LSU is doing well, but it's a program that expects to compete for championships. And so you have to compare it to hold it to a different standard. And so the other thing I was going to mention off of that was just that, what was it exactly? The house settlement, they're going to be fine, all that. Yeah. Oh, the other thing is, we'll see exactly what happens with NIL. Our collective's going to go away. The future of LSU's collective is uncertain. Everybody I've talked to this spring, they don't exactly know how they're going to continue to use it, if it's going to be in place, all those sorts of things as of July 1, because there might be this clearinghouse that comes as a result of the settlement, where every deal over $600 has to get passed for fair market value and judged on fair market value, which is going to be fascinating to see how they determine those things. But the thought is that it's going to curb spending by collectives and sort of put in some guardrails there, so that you can't just go and buy a ridiculous, spend a ridiculous amount of money and buy your roster, that you need to have this salary cap management and all that. The other thing, though, is that teams are going to try to figure out a way to circumvent the cap and to get exceeded. And LSU is going to as well. They're going to try to find a way around it. And LSU's way, at least as we know so far, is to try to find real NIL deals, to use what they have done well in the NIL era, which is promote and market their athletes. I mean, we see LSU has some absolute stars out in the world. I mean, gosh, they had 5 athletes at the Met Gala, 5 former athletes at the Met Gala this week. I mean, they're able to market and promote and use their brand, and that's what they want to try to do as they move forward. They set up a partnership earlier this year with their longtime sports properties partner, their longtime media rights partner Playfly. They're going to try to go out and get real NIL deals to kind of go over the cap, and we'll see how that works out so that they don't have to continue to rely on those donors just writing checks.
Yeah, that's I was going to go on the record as saying, like, just because the NIL era may officially end and there's this collective and house settlement and all that, it feels a little bit like trying to put the toothpaste back in the tube, where now that these players have seen what their market value is, it's going to be difficult to limit people from making payments that are against the rules. And look, we're not naive. We know that's always happened to a certain extent, or at least in certain places. But that could continue also. And if that's the case, then LSU can't have an official program for it. They can't have an official way to organize it. They can organize the salary cap part of it, so to speak. But that is a Wild West and a whole new direction of the term. And that honestly is probably a whole nother podcast. What will happen? What will
happen to the collectives? Yeah. It's going to be probably the most critical thing in terms of like how teams come together and work over the next few years is what happens with those things. If this clearinghouse is actually effective, there'll probably be lawsuits that come out as a result of it. But if it's actually effective in curbing NIL spending and making it realistic fair market value, but how do you even decide what's fair market value from person to person? Then we can actually maybe see those numbers kind of come down from how they've inflated and maybe actually stay within the salary cap. But there's a lot of skepticism out there about how effective that's really going to be and how much it's going to work.
Yeah, count me among the skeptics. All right, Wilson, before we wrap things up here, anything else that you wanted to highlight about your story or about this sort of, plan and process that LSU used to such effectiveness to sign its transfer class?
I think I'll just leave it with what Brian Kelly thinks about this team now. He said that prior to this, it wouldn't have mattered, what LSU did. They didn't have the talent to go and win the SEC. He says that now they have a roster that is poised to compete with anybody in the SEC and that they didn't before. So the head coach himself is understanding of and sort of setting these expectations of what LSU should do and be in the mix for here in 2025. Outside, there's all those expectations, but even the head coach, I think, is setting them himself, that LSU should be in contention for the playoff. And that is really, I think, the baseline of what this team needs to accomplish to be able to take the pressure off of Brian Kelly and everybody else around this program going into what would be in 2026 his 5th year of a 10-year contract. They need to get into the playoff, and he thinks that they have a team that can do it. So they need to go and execute when they go to play games this fall, starting with that big Clemson opener, to be able to reach that 12-team field, because LSU really hasn't come close, that close in his tenure, as we talked, I think, Bill, about on Tuesday. And especially, that's going to be vital for this team now.
Yeah, I agree. And speaking of executing and the opener of Clemson, we're going to have plenty of podcasting to do before then. We'll be back probably next week. I don't know, Wilson. We got to talk schedule and everything, but we'll be back to talk more LSU football. Just about. Yeah, I'm not going to promise every week because we've got other things going on too in our lives. It's our off season too, but almost
baseball postseason's coming up.
That's right, baseball postseason. We have some post game shows, all that sort of stuff. But we are rolling here on the LSU Sports Insider. So subscribe to the YouTube channel. Take a look at the LSU Insider podcast there and the other videos we post. And we will be back next week. So for Wilson Alexander, I'm Zach Ewing. Thank you for watching the LSU Sports Insider.